Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Richard Grannon and Friends. We have with us again Dr. Paul Taylor. Thank you for coming in, sir.
Thanks for having me.
All the way from Mould.
North Wales.
North Wales, all the way from North Wales to the wonderful city of Liverpool on this rainy day. We're going to be looking at a few different topics today, but if we could just start by establishing your background and experience in the education system.
Yeah, I was a critical theorist, and if I do it backwards, I finished my career at the University of Leeds. I did my PhD at Edinburgh. I did my undergraduate and PhD at Edinburgh. My degree was economics and politics. My PhD was a strange thing. It was the social shaping of computer hacking. And then I went to University of Manchester, did a research job that looked at the use of computer systems in the NHS National Health Service and what a disaster that is. And this was about 30 years ago and nothing has changed. So that's interesting. Then I went into a sociology department. I did the sociology of technology, which I've said before is two-ology, so it's really important. Then I went to a communications department, went from Salford to Leeds, and I developed our mutual friend, Slavoj Žižek. I edited a journal in his name. I wrote books about him, mostly.
Sorry, you are his friend. I am merely a stalker.
Well, I did a book on him, a book on Martin Heidegger, who's a German philosopher. Basically, anyone who's dead and difficult and a white male,
you like.
I tended to do research on. And I've got quite a wide range in the sense that you've got some North American viewers.
Right.
So as an undergrad, I spent a year at University of Pennsylvania on a year-long scholarship. Later on in my career, when I was at Leeds, I spent 4 months at Penn State, which is the western part of Pennsylvania. A big shout-out to everyone in Zeno's basement bar.
Nice.
Because I became the unofficial darts champion there.
Did you really?
Yeah. So that was one of the highlights of my career. I've spent quite a bit of time in Finland, Tampere and Turku. I was a visiting scholar in Olomouc, which is the eastern part of the Czech Republic. So I've got quite a good range. And in the UK, just so viewers realise, I've got a range of experience. I was an external examiner. I was admissions tutor. So I've been around the block and I've witnessed education in South Korea, Malaysia. So I've got a good frame of reference, I think.
Have you been to Malaysia?
Yeah, it was only a few weeks. It was on like a technology mission.
Nice.
It was linked to the University of Salford and Salford City Council.
How many years total would you say you've done in the education system?
Approximately 30 years.
30 years.
So 3 decades.
Okay. A variety of countries, variety of roles.
Yeah.
So you've seen a lot of the education system.
And the time, I think, is significant. So to jump right into some dead white male philosophers, there's a guy called Walter.
Racist.
There's a guy called Walter Benjamin, who was a Jewish intellectual who died in the 1939, I think, at the outbreak of the Second World War. But he had this concept of the angel of history. And it was based on, there's an abstract painting by a guy called Paul Klee. It's an oil drawing painting that he bought from Paul Klee, the artist. And it's it looks like a child's drawing. But Benjamin, from this painting, developed this concept of the angel of history. And the idea was there's been a massive explosion and an angel's being thrown backwards. And the angel is looking at human history, which is the accumulation of one disaster after the other.
Can you look up the angel of history, please, sir? Thank you. I'll just pop it on the screen.
I think the painting by Paul Klee was the Is it Angelus Novus or something? But it just struck me as a beautiful image of this angel being thrown, hurtling backwards, whilst it was what we've spoken about briefly before, the idea that, there you go. It wasn't lying, was I? It's quite odd.
That is odd. It does look like a child's drawing.
Yeah, but...
So it's thrown backwards by the force of the various catastrophes of history.
And then, so the idea is, rather than this idea of history being this progressive improvement for an angel flying backwards, you just see one disaster after the next, all piling up.
Very Žižekian view of history.
Well, I just think that's a nice image to describe my career.
Nice. So a history of catastrophes, one thing after the next.
Well, and then it ended, I might have said this in a different venue, but basically not long after lockdown, we were still doing some online teaching, and my final ever lecture was just to a load of avatars, and one by one they disappeared. I didn't see any human faces, and I could see my image looking back at me in this empty computer screen. And I think line is it, T.S. Eliot, it ends, the world ends not with a bang but a whimper. And that was also my career. It ended with a whimper.
You finally left the academic world not that long ago, 2 years?
Yeah, it's probably it feels a lot longer, probably about a year and a half, yeah.
Okay. And I agree with you on these things. So to keep the dynamic tension within the interview, I will just ask, I won't offer my opinions. Dr. Paul Taylor, you have claimed that there is a decline in academic standards. What do you think has caused that, and what is the evidence of that?
In reverse order, the evidence, just at the time this will go out, it's approximately, it will be about 3 weeks back. There was an article in The Telegraph that drew upon, anyone not from Britain, The Telegraph is a national newspaper. It's available online. And the statistics are all available online that they draw their information from. There's a national body of educational statistics. And they give the degree classification. So for those outside the UK, a first-class degree is the best you can possibly get. And they used to be rare as hen's teeth. A 2-1 is a very good, you've just failed to get the best you could. A 2-2, or as they used to call it in Liverpool, a Desmond, after the Archbishop Tutu, those wacky, funny Scousers. A 2-2 was basically the average degree. And then a third used to be known as the drinker's degree. And I had more respect for people who got a third than a 2-2, because a 2-2 just showed you weren't committed to the student lifestyle and you weren't committed to working.
Yes, you were doing neither. The
drinker's third, I just thought, well, if you're not going to study, get a third. But anyway, they were, thirds were rare, firsts were rare, 2-2s were normal, a 2-1 was a good result. They've done, you can see the graph now. Now, a first-class degree or a 2-1, so the top 2 marks, in about a year ago, when the figures apply, the University of Manchester, which is a very large British English university, 89% of all students get a first or a 2-1 now. Leeds, where I left, 92% of students are getting a first or a 2-1.
These are the real
figures. Now, you went to university, and if you don't mind me asking, I went from 85 to 89 for my undergrad, 89 to 93 for my PhD. So there was some overlap between you and I, probably,
I was 96 to 99.
Right, so sorry, you are later,
Yeah, and the rot had already set in. There was already articles being written about just the sheer number of people who were going to university. So I was already possibly within an intake where you would argue that I might not have gotten into university, maybe say 10 years before. So the rot was already in.
Well, I hope I've dealt with the evidence. Yes. I encourage people to do their own research.
I mean, it's what you've just told me, to clarify for people watching, 89% are getting a first or a 2-1.
Yeah.
Absurd. I mean, then it's meaningless.
Well, in my day, I'm guessing, I need to check this, but my sense was a first was about 5%. It depends on the subject, depends on the year. But 5% of people getting a first, I don't think it's an unrealistic guess.
Okay.
Now, at many universities, it's roughly a third. So
that's just ridiculous.
That is not a special qualification.
No, if everybody's getting the special qualification, it is no longer a special qualification.
And if people want to doubt me, I would suggest ignore me. A-levels, for those who aren't British, again, we have a high school system where we specialise at the age of 16, and you do, at least it used to be, 3 subjects in depth.
Yeah.
Now, when I did my A-levels, I went to a good university afterwards. Those 3 A-levels, and you did something called general studies that you didn't really have to study for because it was general knowledge. But for those 3 topics, I remember the exam period lasted for about, spread out, but there was about 3 really intense days of round-the-clock exams.
Yeah.
And I can honestly say they were more difficult than my university final exams in terms of the amount of effort.
Yes.
They really were tough.
Yeah.
Now, nowadays, it's not like that. And they now have not just a grade A. Again, in those days, if you got a grade A, this was quite a rare event. Now they've had to develop A stars. An A star, for anyone who isn't familiar, an A star is not that an A is not good anymore, but we just want to say that you're extra special if you get an A star.
Yeah.
No, so many people were getting A's. They had to develop a new qualification, an A star.
Yeah.
And on it goes.
Yes, yes, yeah.
And the solution to cut to the end of all this is simple. I've discussed it before, but why not just have a cut-off point? Only 5% of students ever get an A, for argument's sake. 10%, 20%. Agree on a number, have a cut-off point, and then every single year you're guaranteed a certain level of quality. And that could be done overnight, but they won't do it. Why?
So the general direction that education has moved in is towards mediocrity.
Yeah, and sorry, and you did ask, so I gave the evidence. You also asked, why do I think it is? And I call it the unholy trinity. I think it's the commodification and expansion of numbers. You think of those two things together. Because everything got commodified and expanded, there was also a need to turn this into a huge bureaucratic control freakery situation. And then the final aspect of the trilogy is technology. Technology has advanced. I witnessed the beginnings of the internet. It was roughly about 93, the World Wide Web came into its own. So I was studying computer security. I was studying during the rise of the internet. So I witnessed all this. I was using emails in 1987, which is quite early. So this all happened, and I witnessed the technology, but there just seems to be very, very little cognizance within. And I worked in a communications department at the end. There doesn't seem to be any recognition of the deleterious effects of technology on the educational process.
Okay.
So I don't know, in your lectures, when you sat there, were there banks of laptops around you with other students?
No, we didn't have that.
Right.
If you wanted to use a computer, you had to go to the computer department to that level. We sat with pens and pieces of paper.
Well, when I was teaching third year, final year courses, there'd often be 40 to 50 people. And I would say, in my class, you're not allowed to use a laptop. There's this radical thing called a piece of paper and a pen.
Yeah.
Now, the reason for that is twofold. One, if you've got a laptop in front of you, it's a barrier. You're typing with your head down. If you hear something that you want to check, you will look it up, and you've missed the next 4 or 5 sentences.
Yes.
So that's just, it's not efficient. You're not paying proper attention.
Yeah.
The other factor is that they've done studies, when you write things down, even if it's not particularly efficient in terms of the amount you can write down, at a later period, if you go and read your own notes, it means more to you because you wrote it down and your brain and your hand are linked in quite subtle ways. Whereas if you type something, you often don't remember the context.
I'm smiling because I read an Instagram post recently that had gone viral, had hundreds of thousands of likes. I think it was Andrew Huberman who'd reposted it, but it was from somebody who works in an academic field that he'd interviewed, and they were talking about how to improve people's capacity to remember what they had learned in class. They said, write it down, take notes. And I was like, do you mean the way we fucking used to do it? We've got this revolutionary new method that assists with your memory, and these are the neurological reasons why it assists with your memory, and it encourages left brain, right brain activation, and then you have an emotional connection to the information, and even the way you've written it can trigger a memory.
You do subtle things like you'll underline something.
It's called taking notes. I was like, are you fucking kidding me? And that was the revelation. And they were saying, it's important to interact with the material and to talk to each other about the material. I was like, wow, mind blown. This is cutting edge psychology here.
No, it really does surprise me that people pay so little attention to this. And the simple thing about, you talk about interacting. If I'm the lecturer and I can only see the tops of people's heads, if you're a good lecturer, which I prided myself on being, which we can talk more about the definition of what a good lecturer is, because that has changed, unfortunately, you will sense people's brows furrow when they don't get something.
Yes.
And once in every 20 years or a leap year, a student will realise something, and a little light goes on. And the phrase, a light goes on.
Yes.
You can actually see it in someone's eyes when they've cottoned onto something that's been bothering them or they didn't understand before. And all these very subtle cues you pick up if you're an alert lecturer. I understand some lecturers will read from notes and they're boring.
Yes.
But
Yes.
if you invest your time and you've got the confidence to extemporise and talk lucidly about the subject you know a lot about, and you're receptive to how people are responding. This is, and one last thing about the notes. So, it's very important. And the last thing about the notes is I always used to beat myself up. I thought I should have learned to take shorthand because I thought, wouldn't it be highly useful to be able to take every single word that's spoken? And back to your point, they found that even if you learn to take shorthand, because you're getting every single word, all the things you said about the interaction with the material is lost.
Yeah.
Even if you're writing it by hand in shorthand.
Yes.
So that would be a false economy, even if you could write everything down.
Efficiency is not so efficient if you have to keep going back and
It's a paradox.
retranslate it. Yeah.
The less you actually, it's not the less you write down, but when you don't write down everything, your brain works at filling in the gaps.
Is there a movement in education? So if we look at like where education would have come from, presumably it would have only been for the noble classes who had money, and you'd probably have a philosopher who knew 6 different subjects and knew how to wrestle as well, and knew how to fish and hunt and whatever. I'm talking like ancient Greece now, with 3 or 4 students, and they would presumably converse and discuss and argue and learn to argue. And then across time, you just, as you use the term commodification, you increase the numbers, and the practicality of that becomes, well, it shrinks. And so then you have this industrialized version of education. I believe the term educare, is not to shove information into people. Educare is to bring out the best of them. It's very idealistic. Like, how can you do that if you're a lecturer and you have 50?
Exactly. But the one thing to add also is just to show that I am reflexive. I moan about other people not being reflexive. Aristophanes, the Greek playwright, I think it was called The Cloud. Forgive me if I've misremembered. But he was writing about the way in which private tutors in Athens were ripping students off.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Go online and find, I think, I might refer to it a couple of times, but there's an online journal called Unheard.
Okay.
UNHERD.
It's very good.
It's very good. And back a while ago, someone did a whole article about Aristophanes and the cloud, and how certain things, nothing's new under the sun, to quote Ecclesiastes.
Right.
So even in ancient Greece, people were accused of ripping people off, giving them bogus courses. So I am aware that
there is a history. There is a history.
Some of the things I'm claiming are new.
Yeah.
But your point about and my point about the commodification, there's still a difference. When you and I were at university, the numbers, and I personally benefited from it. So I did my undergrad with undergrad degree with very low numbers. As I was beginning my PhD, the first year you weren't allowed to do any tutorial work because you're starting your PhD. In the second year, it almost exactly coincided with the expansion of numbers. So in 1980, 91-ish, it must have been, I was getting paid in those days £18 an hour to teach tutorials. And I was doing about 15 hours a week. Okay. I've never had so much disposable income. Seriously.
Yeah.
Because I lived in student digs.
Yeah.
I dressed like, I've never dressed well. So all I spent on was going out and having fun.
Nice.
So it was wonderful. But this was evidence of, I wouldn't have been able to do that even 3 or 4 years earlier, because there wouldn't have been this number of students to teach.
And this is 1980.
I started pitching in 1989.
Okay.
So round about 1990, 91.
Yes.
My memory is that John Major first said that everything could now be called a university.
That was the thrust of the articles that were coming out at the time, 96, 97,
Yeah.
when I joined the university, was they were saying you track it back to 1988 to now, and you have an explosion in the student population.
Well, first, they relabeled everything. And this is interesting because it means I'm not making a party political point. I'm suggesting that both the Conservatives and Labour, in American terms, the Republicans and the Democrats, were equally stupid and culturally destructive in what they did. So this isn't about an individual party. This was a determination to, for whatever reason we can debate, but to democratize, you could say, kindly, charitably, but just to expand what always was an elite pursuit of knowledge at the highest level.
Isn't democracy always the enemy of elitism?
As in practice, probably, yeah. Although not as it's now interpreted, because now you have, maybe we're going slightly off topic, but you have technocratic elites who like the fig leaf of democracy until, as with the Brexit referendum, they lose the popular vote. And then somehow democracy is no longer important. And interestingly as well, this is a party political point. I think both in America and Britain, the left, there's this new notion of populism as a dirty word.
Right.
So Trump is a populist, Farage was a populist. Populism is a code word for racist, xenophobic, disgusting.
What should it mean in its purest form?
It's just the demos, the people.
So if you're populist, you're popular.
You appeal to the people, but this is the point.
The populists
love
you.
A lot of left-wing, insofar as the left wing have made gains in Western society, it's interesting that they've done it through bureaucratic and administrative means. So maybe we'll talk about the abortion issue later on, but Roe versus Wade was a superior court interpretation of the Constitution that's been struck back. And in purely legal terms, before we discuss the rights and wrongs of abortion, in purely legal terms, Roe versus Wade was a stitch-up.
Okay.
But they couldn't, it wasn't to widen access to abortion wasn't politically popular at the time. So we'll do it another way. And so I would suggest that what I find quite disturbing, this notion that populism is a dirty word, often hides scarcely veiled contempt for the unwashed people who actually vote.
Right.
If you don't believe in democracy, I'm fine with that.
Yes, I
Say
don't.
you're an oligarch.
Okay.
Say you're a technocratic elite who hates people. This is the point about elitism.
I do hate people.
But this idea that, democracy and elitism are in opposition.
Yes.
They are the way I'm describing, but do you notice the way that the democracy gets manipulated?
They are in theory, but not so much in practice.
Well, my point is, without being a QAnon conspiracy theorist, what I'm suggesting is that people make use of democratic fig leaves and formal structures to act in deeply anti-democratic ways.
100%.
You either believe in democracy, so you agree with losers' consent.
Yes.
And again, this isn't a party political in the sense that I remember being in my village pub, and when Jeremy Corbyn in the UK was a very left-wing candidate, a Bernie Sanders type left-wing, and I overheard someone say in a big loud voice, if he ever gets elected, I hope someone takes him out or something, or there should be a coup. And I'm thinking, hang on, it just struck me that how small people's tolerances for democratic outcomes they don't like.
Yeah.
Jeremy Corbyn wouldn't have been my choice, but if he'd have been duly elected, who the hell am I to say that's...
Yeah.
And in recent times in Britain, Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng were the Prime Minister and Chancellor of the Exchequer, respectively. They weren't basically allowed to do what they wanted to do by the money market. Profoundly anti-democratic, whether you think they're idiots or not.
That's why I like saying to people, I hate democracy, and you see them go like this, and I said, but you don't like it either. Nobody does. Nobody does. What we like is getting what we want, and that's not what democracy is. It is a rule, simply, demos, crassy. Demos is people, crassy is the rule, and it's the rule of the mob. Yeah, and so I think it's an appalling notion.
But scratch the surface, people love to say they're democratically minded. In practice, they are not.
No. Perhaps none of us are. Perhaps it's not in human nature. I also said elitism, and elitism has become a dirty word now.
Well, it is, yes and no. So I'm fascinated. I love my sport. I know you're not so much sport fixated, but you love your martial arts. Yeah?
Yes, yeah.
What could be more elitist? I just love the concept of cage fighting.
It's great, isn't it?
You can say you're the best in the world, go in that cage and prove it.
Yeah.
Or you're full of it.
Yeah.
You don't, in an academic environment where everyone's getting top marks, it's elitism's out the window.
Yes. Yeah.
So what I'm suggesting is in certain aspects of society, elitism's alive and well and beating people around the head.
And should be. Because people say, oh, I don't like elitism. And I think they're thinking, well, that would mean that I'm not invited to the party. And then I think, yes, but if you had a child with a brain tumour, you would love elitism at that point. You would want the best surgeon, and you wouldn't be thinking about their ethnicity or their age or their background or their culture. You just want your child to live.
Or a simple example is, why can't I turn up at Anfield where Liverpool, my team, play and say, oh, all right, I'm a fat old bloke, but I want to play.
Yes, I would like to compete with John Jones in the cage. However, because I believe in democracy, I would like him to be severely handicapped so I have a chance.
But did you get the irony? So what I'm saying is people have no problem with elitism in certain contexts.
Yes.
Why education? And this is from a place where I've spent my life teaching people. I believe everybody should have access to education.
Yes.
But it needs to be structured in a way they're going to get the most out of it.
Yes.
Dragging everyone down to the lowest level. Because maybe we could talk about this in the university sector now. There's a mini dyslexia industry.
Yes.
There are dyslexia units. And speaking as someone who is so, ironically so bookish, because my mother never diagnosed as dyslexic, but I'm guessing nowadays would be profoundly, my late mother, she would have been diagnosed as profoundly dyslexic. She made me read as some type of compensation for her inability. So I'm very conscious about how I weirdly benefited. But the point is my mother didn't demand to go to university. And I happen to be, quite literate. I think it's odd that quite a few dyslexic people, I get the sense, tend to be highly creative, highly musical. They have other gifts. I am tone deaf, no sense of rhythm. I throw some shapes on the dance floor despite that.
Go ahead, lad.
But the idea that because you can't do something, everyone has to adapt for your inadequacies.
This, in the American military, there was a big... It was a polemic, and it started in the mid-2000s, and I only knew about it because of teaching self-defense. And so I'd be chatting to some of these chaps on forums, and there was a group, they'd left the Navy SEALs, and they were now doing independent training, and they would write these beautifully worded essays about lowest common denominator training inside of the American military. They said, do you want, so for example, pistol shooting, do you want your soldiers to be the best pistol shot? Or do you want as many soldiers as possible to qualify? Because those are two completely fucking separate objectives. Of course, they're special forces. Of course, they're elitist. But their point was, you must choose. And they called that lowest common denominator training. So we can create situations where everyone's going to pass and we all get the qualification award, or we can make people the best they're going to be. And that means some people will drop. They're going to drop out. They're not going to make it because they haven't got it.
Or you set up parallel systems.
What would a parallel system look like?
Well, for example, night school, community colleges, and I'm not being patronising. There used to be working men's associations for literacy. There used to be the working class took literacy incredibly seriously because they saw it as a path to success. That you could, I honestly believe that universities should be like the American idea, the Peace Corps. British academics are brilliant at middle-class, tofu-eating liberal values, but they don't know one end of a dirty working-class person from the other. Now, how about they get sent to inner cities and teach working-class kids about things those working-class kids would never get access to otherwise?
How about they themselves?
Yeah. As part of the promotion process. How about universities show real social conscience rather than trying to gouge?
You mean do something?
Practical and actually socially constructive as opposed to virtue signaling. So what you'll get in universities now is you'll get lots of all the shades of the Benetton poster.
Yeah.
Different skin colours.
Yeah.
Complete diversity now. vast majority of those people from whatever ethnicity tend to be incredibly middle class. Or they're working class kids who've been given a affirmative action to get in. And then either struggle or, your point, everyone does lowest common denominator teaching. Now, I gave you some because you asked me for the evidence, I gave you some quite specific statistics, which for the people online who get all, nerdy about it, if I can give you some casual empiricism from my direct experience. When I first started teaching, I'm just using rough impressions, there'd always be, in a class of argument's sake 50, there'd be 3 or 4 students who I really had to make sure when I gave a lecture I'd prepared. Because I knew every single week they'd ask me awkward questions. And certain questions, if you've been lecturing a while, it's a bit like a stand-up comic. You get, not put-downs, but you find techniques to deal with situations. And you get better and better at it. But still, if you've got a really highly motivated, highly intelligent student, they can put you on the back foot. And if you're intellectually honest, rather than just sidestep it, my big mistake in life is always to try and address it head on. And I loved it because it really pushed me. I couldn't be bored. You can't just go through the motions. If there's 3 or 4 of these little buggers who are going to give you a hard time in a nice way. Now, as it got on, if I saw one of those students in a class, and then when I say there was 4 of those, there'd be a large swathe of really involved. They wouldn't be as bright, but they'd ask good questions, and you could tell they were hungry for knowledge. And then you'd get the laggards, which would be the rump, a small number. And then those proportions have just changed to reflect the way I mentioned the proportions of Marx going. So you didn't see the very, very highly motivated, bright students. You'd one every 2 or 3 years, maybe.
They just weren't.
They weren't there anymore.
Why does this matter? What difference does it make? Maybe it's a great thing that everybody gets a degree and we all feel good and we're all intellectuals now. Isn't that better that we all get a degree? Why does it matter if the quality is going down?
Well, my common sense response would be a little knowledge can be a dangerous thing. So as someone who's deeply involved in critical theory, we've discussed this in the past, postmodern theory, it saddens me to see in the way it's misrepresented by both its practitioners and the people who pick holes in it. So it matters because there isn't a level of argumentation anymore in society at large. I'm noticing, I don't know whether you notice, everyone realizes that online discussions are not the perfect environment. But I have noticed...
perfect environment to induce mental illness.
Yes. Which I take very seriously, that point you just made. I honestly think it's neurotics heaven. But let's just say it's not. Let's just say there's lots of well-adjusted people who are online. Let's have that imaginary...
And they want to be heard in the comments section because they're well-adjusted and have busy lives.
But what I've noticed, and maybe I'm just an idiot, because it's taken me so long to notice this. And remember, I don't use social media. This is your fault in the sense that...
Doesn't have a mobile phone.
But I've had to check the comments for the videos we've done because I was promised I would. And I've been dragged down the rabbit hole.
You mustn't do that.
And you can't help it because you start off thinking you're engaging in a rational discussion.
Oh, a good faith debate. Is that what you thought?
But would you accept? Again, it's impressionistic, but it just strikes me that in my lifetime I've noticed. I think you might have just called it good faith debate. That seems to have become extinct. And people I use the phrase, they presuppose their own conclusions. They have strongly held views that, from what I can gather, aren't based on any actual knowledge. And they will then pick holes in your argument or try to, and never, ever respond to any direct points that point to inconsistencies or irrationalities in their own. So it's just dual monologues. And again, in my own defense, I always because I take it as a personal challenge. If someone's asked a specific point about one of my arguments, I like to think I want to have the best arguments I possibly can. Is that a weakness? So if you're in a cage getting clobbered by someone's right hook because your defense is bad,
Yeah.
if you're a decent martial artist, you think, I have to do something about my defense.
Yes.
I keep getting clobbered by a right hook.
Yes.
Well, if I realise in good faith that someone's picking a good hole in my argument, I need to strengthen that argument.
Yes.
And that's where physical exercise and mental exercise have similarities.
That's why I made the point, some people might have missed it, about the Greek teacher also teaching you wrestling. That is what they would do.
Yeah.
The same guy who's teaching you how to think, if he's not teaching you wrestling, he's at least going to teach you physical movement and gymnastics. Yeah. And you had to do it. They didn't separate body and mind.
So on a slight side note, I don't think it's a coincidence. Have you heard of chess boxing?
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
Chess is intellectual boxing.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's the same type of, you've got an argument, I'm going to use this opening. The counter argument is that opening's not very good. I'm going to do something back.
Yeah.
And that's how, this is the notion of elitism at the highest level. That's how things work.
Yes.
But there are so many people, because you say, what's wrong with people? People get a little bit of knowledge, they become invested in that knowledge, but not often in good faith. So there'll be Marxists, there'll be Foucaultians, and they become emotionally invested. And they will defend to the death their right to hold those views that haven't been properly interrogated.
I have run forums. I have been moderator. I've been a moderator on forums on and off since 2004. And I have to monitor Instagram comments and YouTube comments. In nearly 20 years, I have never once seen a spontaneously developed good faith debate online, to the point where I won't do it because I know nobody's arguing good faith. Even in real life, it's hard to get a good faith argument. The last time I had one was with Francis and Constantine on trigonometry on the interview. That was a good faith argument. And with you, I can't really have them because we're both belligerent in the same way, unfortunately. So there's not really much we disagree on.
Well, we're both, can I tell me this one? We're both pathologically Socratic.
Right.
Dementedly Socratic.
Demented. Yes, and dementedly Socratic.
And I take that insult, if it is an insult, any day of the week.
Yes.
And even when I said this to you before, even when we disagree too much, you've still asked me questions that I haven't thought about before. Obvious questions. That's not an insult.
No, yeah.
But you see, we don't realise what we take for granted.
Actually, I think it's a big compliment. I think because that's what makes me think. And it's good psychology, it's good psychotherapy. A good psychotherapist, you'll be talking about your problem that you're wrestling, and you're in the nuance, and you're out there in the branches of it. And then a good psychotherapist will say, "Have you considered this?" And you'll think, "Fuck," and it's obvious to someone outside, but when you're in it, it's not so obvious. And I think that's where I see my frustration, my disappointment is there are so many opportunities for how things could be developing right now, and they're not because of just simple human ego. You can see where psychotherapy, philosophy, psychoanalytic theory even, and good faith debate could really be developing in these online spaces for free.
Could I give you a very specific example of how things might be better? Because I am so conscious that I am such a miserable sod.
Isn't it wonderful?
I revel in pessimism. But when I do have... The Peace Corps idea of sending academics out into city centres.
I love it, but
seriously, there'd only be a few fatalities.
Just send them out in stab-proof vests. Good luck.
But structurally, there are things that could be done. So one very, very specific example, there's a guy called James Lindsay, who's relatively famous online.
Yes, I like James Lindsay. Right. Yeah.
He wrote a book with Helen Pluckrose called Cynical Theories, and he's got an independent career of his own now. His latest book is called The Marxification of Education. And he has a bee in his bonnet about Marx. And he cites, just to give background, so I'm sorry for being so detailed, there was a Brazilian educationalist called Paulo Freire, or F-R-E-I... Sorry, F-R-E-I-R-E. So is that Freire or...
Fucking hell.
You're the Portuguese expert.
F-R-E-I-R-A.
R-E.
R-E. Freire? Freire. Something like that, maybe.
And he was a self-acknowledged, self-avowed Marxist, and he wrote a book that was very influential in educational circles called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And what's interesting was, nobody was teaching in favelas.
Ah, okay.
And it was for mostly peasants and working class people who were illiterate.
Thank you, mate.
Yeah.
Paulo
So
Freire.
these were illiterate peasants, illiterate workers, and he had a very Marxist, and it was linked with liberation theology at the time.
Right.
So there's a Catholic redemptive element to it all.
Yeah.
And linked with Marx. What could possibly go wrong linking Marx and Catholicism? No.
Well, yeah, that's a heady. That's a heady brew to drink.
Yeah. So James Lindsay, I think he's brilliantly articulate.
Yes.
He's got forensic mind, and I've seen him,
Yeah.
and I've read the book,
Yeah.
and he traces how this Marxism has infested various educational institutions in the States, and I believe him.
Yeah.
What's interesting is he gives this, and now I'm going to use a really gross physical analogy that he started it, is my defense.
Yeah.
He says it's like toe fungus. that these Marxists,
Kenel Lindsay.
these Marxist educationalists
Yeah.
get into these systems, and like toe fungus, it's very difficult to get rid of. Right. Now, my point, he started it, my point is to develop it. No, he's identified the symptom.
Yeah.
I would suggest the underlying structural cause is more like gout.
Okay.
So gout, you get, typically you'll get a massive inflamed big toe. Mm-hmm. And that's caused by the displacement of crystals. Mm. It's the crystallization of uric acid. Mm. Uric acid is an inflammatory thing in your body that's all over your body. Mm. And it deposits in large joints. Mm. When there's too much of it, it dissipates out and crystallizes in the joint. Hence, you get a massive, it could be your knee, your wrist, but typically big toes are the first thing. Now, I would suggest if you chop off your big toe because it's inflamed, that's not, the real underlying physiological problem is raised uric acid levels.
Yeah.
So you're not dealing with the real underlying issue.
Yes.
So I think James Lindsay is brilliantly analysed, and also in just social research and science, because he's very keen on method. Correlation is not causality. Mm-hmm. So I can completely accept there are a load of Looney Tune, Marxist-influenced pedagogists around. That is not, to go back to our original discussion, the ultimate underlying cause of most of this harm is the commodification of a university degree.
Yeah.
If you're paying for it, you get to be an entitled little whinging student because you're paying for it.
So what you're saying with James Lindsay is he's created a very good analysis, but based on maybe a false presupposition. He's found maybe the slightly wrong target.
Yeah.
Okay.
Deeply wrong target. And same with Jordan. I'm giving you the chance to do your Jordan Peterson impression.
Thank you. If you set me up for Zizek afterwards, I'd be delighted.
There's Jordan Peterson, there's Douglas Murray, people I deeply, deeply admire, but they have a bee in their bonnet about neo-Marxists, cultural Marxists. They're the people taking over all the institutions. No, it's a technocratic elite, some of whom may be these people. But the underlying causes of why our politics is messed up, why our education's messed up, they're deep social processes that have been going on for decades. Christopher Lasch wrote the book, The Culture of Narcissism, in the 1970s. Yeah. And he was identifying the social underlying. He wrote another great book just before he died called The One and Only Heaven, where he's actually, it's very typical and it's very unfashionable. He's talking about lower middle class values that America's lost. That yes, he admits lower middle class Americans could be racist, they could be bigoted, but also they had a small town mentality. And in a small town mentality that maybe we'll get to show the video later, because there's been a big controversy in the States at the moment with Jason Aldean, a country and western singer. But small communities have values that have largely been lost. Now, that has nothing to do with Marxist people in teacher training colleges. These are profound social shifts that have been going on for ages.
I think the other thing that has always bugged me with the Marxism accusation is the people they're saying are Marxist aren't really Marxist in any meaningful sense. They're not. They might be they might wear a Che Guevara t-shirt and they might say Marx, but they're not really Marxist.
Well, there's probably two things I could say about that. One is it would be a Pyrrhic victory, wouldn't it? If these Marxists have managed to turn all our universities into commodified education purchasing.
Right. They're capitalists. Or they're at least fulfilling a truly capitalist agenda.
Yeah. And then the other thing I'd say is, have you heard of the phrase imminent critique?
No.
Right, well, imminent critique's interesting because I've taught loads, and this is the irony, I know this stuff, I've got my stripes. I've done the high denomination military training in cultural Marxism.
Right.
So I know this stuff.
Yeah.
And within this stuff, so for example, we've had this brief discussion, but with Marx, in Das Kapital, chapter 1, section 4, I think it is, about the fetishization of commodities, he says, all that's solid melts into air, all that's holy is profaned. He's talking about the effects of commodification. All that's holy is profaned. Educational values, educational standards to me are semi-holy.
Yeah.
They've been destroyed.
Okay.
Marx is describing processes. So imminent critique refers to using radical theory, its own terms and ideas, against itself. Or not against itself, but against people who claim to be using it.
Yeah.
So if someone says, I'm a Marxist, and it's like, well, Marx describes this commodification. Why are you as an academic pimping out your university on an open day?
Right.
If you're a Marxist.
Yeah.
And these students are paying, foreign students could be paying astronomical amounts for a master's degree.
Yes.
And you're there in your metaphorical fur coat and gold-topped stick with all your chains, and you're pimping out your university. Oh, I'm a Marxist.
Little purple hat with a feather in it.
Seriously, but I'm a Marxist.
Yeah.
No. Not in any meaningful... And I can tell them that because you can do an internal imminent critique.
Tell me more about the imminent critique.
Well, another example, there's a funny, true example. Herbert Marcuse was one of these cultural Marxists that James Lindsay, Douglas Murray, Jordan Peterson hate. He wrote a fascinating book in the 1960s called One-Dimensional Man. And it was about the social, you'll have come across it in psychotherapy, just the emptiness of modern life. There's a phrase in modern man can only find his soul in his hi-fi. Is one, I think I'm paraphrasing accurately. So you'd have to change that now. It wouldn't be hi-fi, it would be whatever. But he's basically saying in technological goods, American culture had become emptied out of substance. Now, I would argue it happened to be a cultural Marxist point. Christopher Lasch, I think, quotes Marcuse quite neatly. Well, I was at Penn State in the 90s, and I think I was giving a guest lecture, and I wanted to get hold of a copy of that book. So I went to the university bookshop to get a copy of One-Dimensional Man. You couldn't make this up. And they actually had a copy. But I swear to God, I don't know whether they've changed it, but Penn State had a bookshop. I have more books in my house than they had in that bookshop. It was a very large room with about 4 or 5 stands of books. Then cuddly toys, Penn State. Football shirts, Go Penn. Everything you could ever want to buy that had a university theme, but actual books. And am I being naive? It's called a bookshop. It was called the University Bookshop.
You've got to have your merch. You've got to make your money. Have your merchandise.
But then I was trying to buy Herbert Marcuse's One-Dimensional Man in the living manifestation of his argument. So sorry, Douglas, sorry, Jordan, sorry, James, I'm not buying this. There's elements... You may profoundly disagree with Marcuse's conclusions, but like Marx, his analysis of the problem is often spot on.
Yes, I had a neighbouring experience with James Lindsay. He does a wonderful critique analysis where he compares ancient Gnosticism and Hermeticism to modern wokeism, and it's wrong. It's wrong. I don't think I understand. Most people who criticize Gnosticism now, they don't really know what Gnosticism is. But I listened to it for 3 hours because it's good.
Yeah, exactly.
It's wrong, but it's good.
But sorry.
And it was good fun.
But while this is fresh in my mind, what I wanted to say was, because I started talking about structural issues. I'm not putting myself forward because I honestly think at a performative level, he's way beyond my skill to engage with him. I think he's very, very good, James Lindsay. But you need someone to actually sit in a room with them and have a good faith debate. And the problem with all of this is partly the same. You and I agree too much.
We do, yeah.
It's so difficult to get someone like James Lindsay and say, if I was in a room with them having this good faith discussion, why does that happen so rarely? Because what happens is James Lindsay will continue to misinterpret or put a spin on things and not be held to, because by the vast majority of time, the people interviewing him don't know the material that he's talking about. So Ben Shapiro interviewed him, and Ben Shapiro does know a lot of stuff, but on critical pedagogy, I don't think I'd be surprised if he'd read Pedagogy of the Oppressed. I've read both in, cover to cover. I've written notes on them. And I'm sorry, James, he may be right, but I think I could at least put points to him that I've never seen him have to defend, because it tends to be this Punch and Judy.
Yeah.
That he will get a kickback from people who are vehemently opposed to him. I respectfully disagree with him, but I've got a lot of sympathy for him.
He might be open to it. I mean, there might be a way of reaching out to him and setting up like a Zoom interview.
Yeah, but this is just one example.
Yes,
Do you get the point? This could happen in so many other people.
I think you said James Lindsay would respond this way, and I think what you meant is a James Lindsay, a theoretical James Lindsay.
Yeah.
Somebody in that position, and you're referencing the way in which this cycle just continues.
Well, Douglas Murray is a great example. His cultural analysis, I personally think is brilliant. I think he's very bravely taken people on.
Yeah.
But I've mentioned this before in a different context. His analysis of Foucault, he has an ad hominem hatred of Foucault that comes out from time to time. He uses cultural Marxism as Jungian shadow work. And I just think, I might be wrong, I just think it strikes me Douglas Murray is so eminently reasonable. If a minnow like me could ever get to speak to him and have a proper discussion with him, I'd be fascinated to see actually. So, for example, Foucault, he had this concept of biopower.
I don't know that, no.
Well, Foucault, he's basically, it's a very simple argument in terms of, he gives lots of historical detail. One of his central arguments is, as history has progressed, governments and the state have involved themselves more and more in mental health, in physical health.
Okay.
So in Britain, we have a government unit called the Nudge Unit, which is basically psychops, ministers and social psychologists. It's designed to push, that's what's called the Nudge Unit. Did you not know about it?
I've never heard of it.
It's actual government unit called the Nudge Unit.
Jesus Christ.
And it's for things like lockdown. They want to nudge the population into doing what they want.
I did know about it for lockdown. Are you saying it exists?
I think it still exists.
Okay.
Apologies if I'm wrong.
Yeah, but it's to push group behaviour in certain directions.
I can talk, but obesity, if they want to get people to stop eating yum nuts, the Nudge Unit...
Why would anybody want that? Monsters.
Evil totalitarian dictators. Stopping me.
That's racist, actually, to lose weight. Do you know this? That it's racist to lose weight? Have you heard this argument? It's a real argument in America. If you promote weight loss, it's an act of racism because certain ethnicities in America are naturally obese, which to me sounds pretty racist to say, like, we should just be fat. Anyway, I stopped you there. Continue.
Yeah, where was I going? Because you put me off my track now. Oh, the Nudge Unit.
Yeah.
So why did I mention the Nudge Unit?
Because you're racist. Just accept your racism.
So the idea that the Nudge Unit, you're being pushed to think in a certain way. And I just find this deeply, deeply problematic.
Oh, God, yeah.
But it's almost like government policy now. It's...
You were saying about biopower and how the state is moving into health and everything else.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, with the Nudge Unit was an example of intrusive, and they're not knocking down your door with truncheons.
Yeah.
That happens if you misgender someone.
On Twitter.
Yeah. What they're doing is trying to... more and more, and Foucault has this beautiful phrase. There was an unheard article by a guy, I think he's called Matt Crawford, but he talked about this is Foucault, had a quote, the minor civil servants of moral orthopedics. What he's describing are state bureaucrats more and more interfering in our everyday lives.
Yeah.
So there are obesity targets, there are nudges to do all these different things. In lockdown, we all went around with face nappies, the vaccination program, all these things that you could discuss. But Foucault brings all this under the concept of biopower, and he traces historically it's got more and more intrusive. Now, I would say to James Lindsay and Douglas Murray, the phrase like, the minor civil servants of moral orthopedics is a beautiful phrase.
It is.
The idea that biopower describes what happened during lockdown.
Yes.
Imminent critique, you could use Foucault's notions to have a very conservative critique of modern trends.
Yeah.
So this idea that Foucault is the devil, I reject.
Yes.
And all his works.
Yeah. So the the biopower. Why is it called biopower if it's about the state taking?
Because they're trying to control biology.
Oh, I see. Oh, okay. They're actually now not just doing what the state should be doing. They're into your body.
Yeah.
They're into what's going into your body, what you're doing.
So Foucault's great work, Madness and Civilization, it's about, for example, and it's interesting how things go in cycles. So people with mental illness, historically in villages, for example, there'd be the village idiot, who I got to teach in my latter years. There are people with general schizophrenic who would be a part of the village. They wouldn't, and then as time progresses, you know much more about this than I do, but the way in which psychologists begin to classify. So I've seen the American guidance on how to classify mental illnesses.
Yes.
If you have 7 of these 10 characteristics,
that's right,
you're schizophrenic.
Diagnostic and Statistical Manual by the American Psychiatric Association.
You tick these things off.
You tick boxes. Do you find that problematic?
Well, I'm just pointing out this is biopower.
I do.
Well, but this is an example of biopower. So whereas it's not, and what I'm saying is it goes in cycles. It may have not have been ideal to have a schizophrenic or someone with mental illness going around the village, but often villages find ways to adapt.
Yeah.
And to get those people into the, care in the community used to actually mean something.
Yes.
Because a community would look after mentally ill people. They'd find a way to adapt.
Yes.
Or they'd have them chained up in the middle of the village in horrific.
Yes.
So they're the possibilities.
Yes.
But that's not happening now. What you have in places like America, ironically, San Francisco, New York, they've stopped treating a lot of mentally ill people on the basis, I'm guessing it's to save money, but they're claiming, and it happened in Britain, let's put mentally ill people back on the streets without supervision and call it care in the community.
Oh, they reclassify the mentally ill as homeless, which is, there is no, I mean, if you speak, we've had people on like Tony Moran who's been working with the homeless for decades, and they are mentally ill. There's very few people.
But you see the difference in, like I say, in the olden days, at least there was the chance that with a genuine community that still existed, those people would be looked after.
Yes.
Now there's no community because we live in anomic, alienated times. But you're putting those same poor people back in a situation without any supervision or help.
Okay.
So at least, mental asylums, mental institutions have a whole history of, they can be quite horrific places. But to absolve yourself of all responsibilities for looking after mentally ill people, or the biopower is mostly, it tends to be, that's when it goes so bizarre that we just absolve yourself completely. But generally the trends are for more and more invasive interference.
Is I have to formulate this. Come on, brain. Is self-absolution the point of giving more and more power to the state, or is it just incidental?
You mean from the people, the clients or the citizens? You're talking from their angle?
The citizen's perspective. Or maybe just humanity in general. Why do we do this? Why is it leaning in this direction? Why do people willingly hand over power to the state?
Well, this is a fascinating question. I can't claim to know the definitive answer, but one of my theories I bore you to death with is post-literacy. If you're not a literate, and the way in which I could give you this could go on forever, so I'll cut it short. But Western society, our concept of what it is to be an individual, has developed from the ancient Greek times. So the Stoics had various psychological exercises. So Marcus Aurelius, his book, The Meditations. Yeah. And this is hilarious. People will buy the Meditations in a bookshop thinking they're being, isn't this great? Barack Obama praised it as one of his favorite books. It was never meant to be read by anyone other than Marcus Aurelius, as far as I know.
It was him.
It was it was an exercise the Romans and Greeks did, where you write thoughts in like a journal as part of the psychological equivalent of physical exercise.
That's interesting.
And
That's very interesting.
Yeah, the idea that we commodify that.
And we consume it.
Exactly.
You're supposed to, so you're not supposed to read meditations, you're supposed to write.
Do it. You're supposed to do it.
Yeah.
It's like me, the equivalent would be me reading about people going to the gym, which appeals to me because I don't want to go to the gym.
This exists. This exists. What is it called? It's called Fitspo or Inspo. So there's material online that people consume voraciously, millions of hours every day. watching other people go through a body transformation process, they get like an endorphin hit, wake up the next day and eat a yum nut. And they're like, I kind of did that. I kind of lived it vicariously. So they are actually, there is that service out there.
My weird equivalent, I shouldn't share this, but hey, my secret guilty watching pleasures, my £600 life.
Oh yeah.
Those type of programs.
Yeah.
Whilst eating fatty food.
You enjoy that.
That is my dream. TV viewing.
That would be psychological torture for me. That would be Clockwork Orange style torture to make me watch that whilst eating terrible food. We covered the unholy trinity. There is this element of the culture war, the university's wider contribution to the culture war and the failure to say no. Is there a culture war? What is the culture war?
Well, I'm probably overly influenced by the fact last night, I'd seen snippets of it, but last night I watched the whole of Matt Walsh's What is a Woman?
Oh, have you never seen it before?
I'd seen snippets.
Okay.
I've watched a lot of Matt Walsh, but
Yeah.
I think I'm too mean to join the Daily Wire or whatever.
Right.
So now it's on YouTube.
Okay.
So I watched the whole thing and it was brilliant. It had French subtitles, the one I watched, the version. I think you can get it without the French subtitles, but I felt extra special.
So nice.
Because I'm
You
seeing everything.
Practice your French as well.
No,
You feel
it was
fancy.
wonderful. And that was, I loved it because I think I'm right in saying that I don't think Matt Walsh went to university. Apologies if he did, but I
don't know of him going.
I think I've seen him saying that he didn't go. He refers to himself as a high school graduate. And he goes to universities and he's talking to the type. There's one male professor. I think I'm allowed to call him male.
You be careful though.
He self-identified as male, I think.
This week.
And he just refused to answer. He gave a circular definition, and Matt Walsh is a sharp cookie.
Yeah.
He said, you've just given do you know what a circular definition is? Because you've just given one. Yeah. And he got, this is what we're talking about before. I would take that as a personal challenge. Yeah. I need to argue back with the point you've just made.
Yes.
You've punched me, I will punch you in martial arts terms.
Yeah.
And the number of interviewees that Matt Walsh met with from academia, who the minute he pushed them said, I'm offended, or I don't like your motivations for asking that question.
And then refused to answer the question. Yeah. My impression was also not just that they didn't want to, they couldn't.
You see, but I don't want to do what they're doing. They're always imputing motivations to other people. I strongly suspect there is thick as two short planks.
That was the impression I got.
Yeah, no, they're verbally articulate, but ultimately thick.
They're thick.
Yeah. As porridge. No, seriously, some of these...
Thick as porridge.
And that guy we're talking about, I've got to... Because I watched it last night.
I know who you mean, the little chappy, yes. Yeah.
And he just refused to engage. I'm thinking, Matt Walsh is legitimately asking you a genuine question, and you're treating a question in a university as a personal insult. Now,
did you get like a Stalinist sort of overtone from that? Like the sense when he was answering, there was like, we have the established thing that we are allowed to say.
Yeah.
And you, comrade, are now saying things that you cannot say.
He actually said, I am a social scientist. And this is what we do, is what you're talking about. And I think I'm fed up whenever you use the word woke. So people online, what do you mean by woke? And it's like, well, basically, I'm talking about you. But they want a definition, and it's a general phenomenon. So I'm changing it now. I'm not going to talk about woke. I now use the phrase cultural Maoists.
Okay.
These are, I encourage people to read as much as they can about the Chinese Cultural Revolution. And you can see the same type of phenomena happening.
Oh, yeah.
These are the Red Guard.
Yes.
These are ideologically autistic people. Seriously, they are ideologically autistic because you cannot get through to them. And apologies, but also that's another sidetrack there, the way diagnoses of autism have shot, what's behind that?
Yes.
Foucault might argue it's biopower because we're beginning to classify things that wouldn't have been classified.
Yes.
But I don't even mean to say it in a sneering way. I think ideological autism is a new phenomenon.
Yeah.
Whereby ideology's always been with us. People have had ideologically imbalanced arguments. But I'm noticing, and I'm just trying to describe phenomena I'm seeing for the first time in which people are genuinely, psychologically, autistically invested in their opinions.
Right.
They will not change. Evidence is irrelevant. To the point that reality itself is being redefined according to people's wishes.
I have a challenge for that. Are you imputing them with too much sincerity and earnestness? Is it not possible that they know perfectly well that it's nonsense and they're kind of engaged in a live action role play, and they know it's not right? They know that they're not engaged in good faith debate, but they're on a team, they're playing a game, and they're scoring points.
Well, I think I've used the phrase emotional investment, and I think we've all done it. I do it all the time. I'm not no saint, but when people... I'm just thinking back to past relationships. When you know you've done something terrible and you have that moment, there are clinch moments when I can be an honest, decent person and own up, or I can keep defending the indefensible.
Yeah.
And I, like many people, often do the latter, much to my shame.
Yeah.
So there is that element. And I used to use all my intelligence and whatever I could bring to muster to defend the indefensible.
Yes.
And that is human nature, partly.
Oh, it's absolutely human nature. I've done the same thing where I'm like, at this point, you should apologize. And my entire body is grating, like it physically fucking hurts. And I'm like, you really are an arsehole if you don't. Like, go take a walk if you need to, but when you come back, you must say sorry. You're like, fuck it all.
Well, like I said, I don't like interpreting people's motivations, because that's the thing I'm criticizing about the cultural Maoists.
Yeah.
They are saying, for example, we don't want someone at a university speaking because we don't think they're doing it with the best of intentions. And it's like, my response is, who are you or who am I to say what someone's motivations for speaking are? Let them speak, engage with what they've said.
Yes.
Have an argument, respectful argument. Don't stand there with a megaphone screaming like an emotionally incontinent child, which is what's happening.
It is a form of narcissistic abuse emotional abuse often used by narcissists to mind read. I already know what your intentions are. I don't need to ask you, because it's obvious what your intentions are. As a white male, as a da-da-da, as a this, as a that, it's clear what your intentions are. And your intentions can only be within a certain range that I have predetermined. And all of this is, it's incredibly patronizing and incredibly rude. It places the person applying the rules above you. And it says, I know what you're doing, and therefore I know what your intentions are. Of course, you don't have a right to speak.
Well, again, imminent critique. I'm trying to remember a quote from Marcuse, which is along the lines of, the unrealistic sound of these propositions is indicative not of their utopian nature, but the strength of the forces arrayed against them.
I think I need to read this.
No. So what he's saying is, if something sounds unrealistic, often it's not because it is a genuinely unrealistic aspiration. It's because there are so many vested interests in stopping it.
Yeah.
So as you were talking, I was having mental images of various documentaries or speeches that have been cancelled. So another one that I advise people to watch is there's a documentary about feminism called The Red Pill documentary.
Oh.
Cassie Jaye.
Okay.
And she starts off as a feminist, and again, reading people's motivations, she strikes me as the most sweet, even-tempered person you could imagine. And she starts off as a feminist, and she wants to do a documentary about male rights activists.
Oh, it's a documentary about the Red Pill community.
Yeah.
Okay.
And she's read about them, and there are gender studies professors, male and female and non-binary and all sorts, who've criticised the MRA, the male rights activists. And she, talk about good faith, she decides, I want to see what they're about. So she goes on this journey. She makes a video diary about her experiences. She films it as a documentary. And by the end of the documentary, spoiler alert, she says, I can't in good faith say I'm a feminist anymore.
Wow.
And that is, talk about Stalinist orthodoxy that she's gone against.
Yes.
And in one little segment, why I mention this, in one little segment, her documentary is going to be shown in an Australian university. And the screaming, emotionally incontinent children, stroke students, are screaming abuse. And as far as I know, it was the first showing in Australia. So they couldn't have seen it. So you've used the wonderful phrase in the past, what type of mental gymnastics do people have to perform?
Yeah.
And I'd use that. What type of mental gymnastics do you have to perform to be in a public space screaming abuse about a documentary you haven't seen?
I don't need to see it. It's racist. It's sexist. Yeah. Yeah, I know.
By the sweetest, nicest, most inoffensive. See, don't trust me.
Yeah.
She seems to be, I don't know her, no links whatsoever. She seems to be such a wonderful, good-spirited woman.
I've not seen this, but I know what the effects on her life will be for having done this. It will be very, very, very tough for her.
And well, before we go, I can add one more example. There's a woman called who's in the actual documentary called Erin. I think it's Pizzer, Pizzer. I hope, but her first name's definitely Erin. And she was the woman who started Refuge for battered women in Britain.
Okay.
Way back, I think it might have been the 1970s. And she had to leave the country because radical feminists basically gave her death threats for the Stalinist crime of suggesting, in her direct experience of taking in battered women, that violence, there was a percentage that were women being terribly abused by violent men. And there was a codependency aspect of violent women with violent men.
Yes.
And she also acknowledged that if you look at the statistics, I think it's mentioned in the Red Pill documentary, 42% of all domestic violence is women against men.
Yeah.
Forgive me if I've got that wrong, because my memory is awful, but I think it was 42%. So it's a minority of cases. I do not want to diminish. Violence against women is horrendous and disgusting. But to pretend it doesn't happen the other way around. And there are lots of examples. The family courts are so biased against men. So there was one case, this poor American guy, a black guy, so he's got some social capital. He has a paternity test to prove he is not the father. And he is bankrupted or borderline bankrupted because the court insists he pays for the child that isn't his.
It's interesting, like you raised the ethnicity issue. There is no social capital when it comes to this issue. All the social capital that they could potentially have anywhere else on this issue, if it's male versus female, then they will lose it. They'll lose it straight away. So
these are examples. We were talking about the university, and it's why I'm using the example of, what are the implications of this? It's happened at my alma mater, Edinburgh. There was What is a Woman? There was a massive outcry, and they interrupted the screening of that. So universities, I would suggest, would be the last place. They would be like the haven where things that normally would be forbidden or verboten or socially unacceptable in the rest of society, that would be the safe space, to use that phrase, where they could be shown.
Yeah.
We've reversed that.
Yeah.
The very place that should be the guardian of difficult ideas held in good faith. And I don't know whether it was a self-description, but I've seen a description of Matt Walsh as a theocratic fascist. And it said theocratic fascist and children's writer, which made me giggle because he wrote this book about Johnny the Walrus. Okay. And I don't know whether he's done that himself, ironically, or this, because you never know these days. Irony has died.
Yeah.
But he's got an admittedly, I think he's a Catholic background. He's a devout Catholic. And he argues for biological reality, and you can disagree with him. But the idea that he's, the old Godwin's law, the minute you call someone a fascist, you've lost the argument.
Right.
Well, Godwin's law applies to Matt Walsh in spades.
Yeah.
Cassie J is not a fascist. If you're reduced to calling someone like her a fascist, but this is happening at universities. And more than that, the university leaders are either not standing up and saying no, or they're contributing to it.
Now, are they not standing up and saying no because universities are effectively now 5-star hotels for brats?
Yes.
And they are the concierge, the hotel manager that needs to serve them effectively.
And I've actually seen, there was a discussion program, I think it might have been Talk TV, Rod Liddell, who's a bête noire of the left, he was talking to a generic feminist, unhappy person, and they were discussing this. And one of her arguments, forgive me, I don't mean to be rude, I just didn't know who she was and I can't remember her name. But she said, because the students, and so this isn't me making it up, because the students have paid high fees, they should get to say who speaks at their university.
Oh, wonderful.
So
why don't they get to say what's on the curriculum or whether they do exams?
Well, effectively that this is happening.
Actually, it is happening, isn't it? Because if they don't feel good, they can claim a mental health issue and get points.
I'll give you an example. Again, a very specific practical example. I was at another university acting as an external examiner. A colleague, it's unusual, but it was such a big course wherein another story lies. Another member of my department was at this external examiners meeting as another external examiner. At the coffee break, they'd been discussing the problem of plagiarism and the poor performance of the students. Now, this was a communication studies department with approximately, you're talking hundreds of Chinese students. And call me racist, I'm not. But if I turned up in Beijing expecting to do master's level education with rudimentary Chinese, I don't know on what planet I could realistically expect that to happen. But there are Chinese students who are maintaining the British education system. Without them, if all the Chinese students went home, our university system would collapse.
Yes, Liverpool particularly.
So I said, she was saying, we've got this problem with plagiarism. I said, well, why don't we do old-fashioned exams? Simple solution. I'm all about solutions.
Yeah.
She said, oh, we couldn't do that. I said, why? And she goes, it wouldn't work for our MA students. Do you know what that sentence actually, do you want me to translate it for you? What that means is, if we had old-fashioned examinations, all these high fee-paying Chinese students would fail. That's what she meant by it wouldn't work. It
wouldn't work. It would create failure and we would be letting down.
And we're not about standards. This is deep in most academic souls now. They've either made a pact with the devil, which is why I left. I couldn't do it anymore. So you've either made a pact with the devil knowing it's wrong, or you've internalized this. And then if you think, I was basically witnessing the educating of the next couple of generations of the Chinese Politburo. That's what I was witnessing.
Before we take a quick pee break, what is a woman? How do you define a woman?
Well, I always defer. An adult male, female is the correct response, apparently.
Yeah.
I think Jordan Peterson says, go and marry one and ask her.
Yes, yeah. Marry one, then you'll know. That's the response I would expect from you white, male, privileged, fascist, racist. We'll be back in just one moment. Yes, we're back. Wonderful. Hello. Good evening. How are we? Let us talk of cowboy hats. What is this naughty gentleman who is called, what's he called? Jason Aldean. What has he done? What's his crime?
Well, he wrote a song I mentioned earlier to segue into this, the concept of small community values, small town values.
Yes.
So he's made a pop song, country song. I think it's called CMT. It's like the country and western version of MTV.
Okay.
And there were objections to it. So if viewers can see it for themselves. And the objections were it was racist and coded violence was being promoted.
Okay.
So maybe we could just see it and see what people think.
Let's see. It'll probably give us a copyright jiggle, but we'll be fine.
Sucker punch somebody on a sidewalk, carjacking old lady at
Could you stick the subtitles on?
Pull a gun on
Thank
the
you.
owner of a liquor
Please.
store. You think
there we go. Thank you.
act a fool if you like. Cuss out a cop, spit in his face.
Yes, they're up, yeah.
Flag and light it up. Yeah, you think you're tough. Well, try that in a small town. See how far you make it down the road. Around here we take care of our own. You cross that line, it won't take long for you to find out. I recommend you don't. Try that in a small town. that my granddad gave me. They say one day they're gonna round up. Well, that shit might fly in the city. Good luck, try that in a small town.
Okay, you can stop there. I think I got it.
Right.
You go.
So he's basically, we've talked before about, and this is also what I find interesting, the value of universities and the fault of universities. So the value of universities is, in a previous video you and I did, I think it's on the Philosophy channel, we talked about this quite esoteric Jacques Lacan, a psychoanalyst, who had this concept of le nom de le père, the name of the father. And it's also a homonym in French, le nom, the no. So name, nom, and nom sound exactly the same. So, but it's about father figures. In Lacanian psychoanalysis, it's the symbolic order. Language it's a way of which people come up against a barrier. It's a form of no.
Yes.
So here you have a man in a big phallic country hat. Basically...
Talking about his granddaddy's gun.
But that's the worst aspect of it. But basically, he's just saying, if you beat up old ladies, if you rob stores, if you spit in a policeman's face, if you burn the flag, there will be a small town value that says, no, you cannot do that. We will not put up with it.
Yeah.
And there's been an hysterical reaction in the States.
Okay.
And if you go through the lyrics, you've identified there's, my granddaddy gave me a gun. So there's two things I'd say. One is, if you put the lyrics of this song next to any rap song of the last 30 years, well, how long rap been going, but of the last 10 or 20 years, it's insignificant in the only violence is potentially implied.
Yeah.
So the lyrics have nothing, I would argue, that is genuinely, you could get offended, upset by. So, the point about post-literate, there's no words that they can pick on.
Okay.
So the one thing they've picked up on is where the building he stood in front of, I think it was about 97 years or so ago, a black man was lynched in front of that building. So they're claiming...
Oh, that was a mistake to... Okay, they gave
you say
them...
that, but again, I don't know. Americans need to chime in, but my understanding was Hannah Montana... Bits of that had been filmed in front of that building, and that building's been used before, because how do you can't not film in front of a building. Yeah,
that's fine. I just my cynicism, and I shouldn't need to be cynical, would be if we're shooting a music video and it's like this, don't give them an opening, and that would be. But yes, okay.
Well, that's the only thing they could come up with.
Okay,
so it's a coded pro-lynching video. I talk about stretching,
unless the lyrics move in a very different direction to this. I don't.
But the other aspect that's interesting is, and it's fascinating, I advise viewers to go online, and there are lots of black commentators in America
saying,
hang on, if you're saying this is racist, you're presupposing that the violence being depicted in the video segments is mostly carried out by black people.
Aha, racism. Counter-racism.
A, it isn't, it's Antifa.
Who are mainly
white.
White people.
Yes.
Pale people.
And B, the idea that black people, you're basically revealing your own prejudices by saying anyone who criticizes crime is indirectly criticizing black people.
Well, that was the same thing with the obesity thing. If you criticize obesity, you're criticizing black people. That is a fundamentally, wildly racist position.
So it's interesting. But so what I said about universities is, so university allows you to bring in Jacques Lacan. And I predicted, we were talking about this before this ever came out. I was talking about the no of the father.
Yes.
And I would suggest that is a pop culture example of Jacques Lacan's psychoanalysis.
Right.
So that's what university allows you to do. Bring in some quite esoteric ideas and then see actual manifestations of them.
Yes.
There's a certain predictive power.
Yes.
The downside is I saw one commentator who was a PhD student. So I don't mean to be snippy, but he wasn't a proper academic. I don't think he'd even got his PhD. But he was using language of social science and deconstruction to argue that this is a coded video all about lynching and racism. How could it be anything else?
Yeah.
Because a little knowledge is a dangerous thing.
Yes.
He's got enough knowledge to find this hook.
Yeah.
To then, in bad faith, accuse people of things they're not genuinely committing.
It's an interesting thing. I am in because of online friendships, basically, and sometimes real-time friendships. And the way in which friendships are maintained nowadays are often, sadly, rightly or wrongly, through the sharing of memes and discussions of things that come up in the public sphere. So I'm in regular contact with a couple of Black Americans, and we talk about this kind of thing. And the thing that they'll often raise with me is the Black American community, generally speaking, culturally, is quite boundaried. And when it comes to crime and punishment, the tendency is towards actually quite strong boundaries. If you've committed a crime, that would be the leaning. So even though you have this democratic, and it would be Labour in this country, exterior, internally, it's quite socially conservative. And so I'm not surprised to see comments like that. I'm not surprised at all to see comments like that because, well, if you walked into a Black community and started smashing things up and destroying things, there would be pushback, and it would be rapid, and it probably wouldn't just be words. It would be very, very strong. The arrogance of the assumption we are speaking on behalf of oppressed groups, minority groups, and you just think your cultural values do not align in any way, shape, or form. Go and ask those communities how they feel about gay, trans, and non-binary. You might not get the answers that you're looking for. You might not get the affirmation that you seek. The other thing that I was thinking as that was playing is, interesting. My gut response, my first response, I'm not ashamed to admit it, was, fucking hell, you can't do that. But that's because of I'm indoctrinated. You shouldn't say that. Why not? That means that I've internalized the idea that there are groups who can use violence and can talk violence, and there are groups who cannot. I didn't even think of, I like rap music. I think you wanted a timeline, probably NWA, Fuck the Police. I think that's 1988. So it's decades of violence, guns,
abuse against women,
misogyny, rampant misogyny.
That somehow on the left, well, let's not go there.
Yeah, it's just quietly permitted. Nobody goes against it. And I was just thinking, oh yeah, of course, there's the internalized rules here. Some groups can, some groups can't. And definitely a bunch of like middle-aged white dudes in cowboy hats and leather jackets playing country definitely can't. But what they're saying, you're 100% right.
Well, at the time of speaking, what makes this slightly unusual is Jason Aldean has not stepped down, not backed down, not apologised. He's doubled down. His wife's a major player on social media. She's backed him.
Right.
And again, I think there's the angry blue-haired people are just a bit befuddled.
Yes.
Because this isn't the rule book. People apologise immediately.
Yes.
And back down.
Okay, interesting. I've noticed, and it's basic bully psychology that we know from school and that we were taught in martial arts. They only attack people who they know will back down because they are bullies. For instance, I never get attacked. I say this stuff all the time and they don't attack me because as bullies and predators, they're smart enough to know what my response will be. Debate me live. Debate me live. Let's get in the cage because I will make mincemeat of you, not through any superior intellectual capacity or superior understanding, but that, what did you call it? The being dementedly stoic. Step by step, defend what you are claiming. Give me evidence. They are terrified of that. And I remain untouched. So yeah, it's funny to see. Yes, they were probably expecting, oh, we're so sorry. But why would these people back down? They know what they've said. They said what they said. They stand by it. And probably in America, the silent majority that Douglas Murray referenced all the time, he said the silent majority needs to stop being silent, will back them up.
Well, can I show you this?
That's American values, by the way, that by population. What we see the screaming blue-haired people in the cities on the coast, that isn't America. That's not the thick end of the American wedge.
Could we see the second video, please? Just an example of this. This is on a more highbrow or political level, at least. This is a guy called Nick Freitas, who I hadn't come across before, and I just came across him. I'm amazed he isn't more well-known as a political figure. So I don't know the backstory. If American viewers, please enlighten us. I do know he has a successful podcast. But I wonder whether he's just backed off politics because it's a pointless cul-de-sac.
Right.
But this is him in the Virginia state legislature, I believe, in the chamber, responding to the opposite side. And I just thought it was a wonderful bit of oratory.
I was asked by a colleague of mine on the other side of the aisle, someone I actually deeply respect, and she asked me, was I going to be nice this session? And I thought it was an interesting question. I don't particularly think of myself as an unnice person, but I can see how sometimes people would see that differently. But you know what I've never done, Mr. Speaker? I've never got on this floor and I've challenged the faith of an elected official because I disagreed with them on policy. I've never gone on this floor, Mr. Speaker, and suggested that the other side of the aisle were racist because they didn't agree with my particular policy positions. I've never suggested they were sexist because they didn't agree with my particular policy positions. But I'm keeping a running tally so far of this session. We're not very far into it. And almost every day, someone on the other side of the aisle either gets up and either subtly or comes right out and suggests that if you don't agree with them on policy, well, then you're not a Christian. You're a sexist. You're a bigot. You're a racist. But the moment someone actually stands up and says, wait a second, no, I'm not going to accept that. If you want to debate me on the merits of our particular policies, I am happy to have that discussion. But at the moment you claim, with no evidence other than we don't agree on a particular policy position, the moment you claim that that makes us racist or sexist or bigoted, Mr. Speaker, I've got news. This was tried during the election cycle. You had a lot of parents coming to their local elected officials asking questions about what was going on in their schools. And the initial response was, oh, it's not there. And then when they saw evidence that it was, based off of what their kids were coming home and saying to them, and they went back and reissued the concern, then they got told, oh, well, then you must be a racist. Because that has been the repeated narrative coming from certain members of the other side of the aisle. And there's been a lot of times where we've sat here politely and just took it. Mr. Speaker, not this time. I'm tired of it. My constituents are tired of it. Because when these claims are made, they're not just made against Governor Youngkin, they're not just made against us. They are made in part against the people that elected to send us here. And I don't know a single person in this chamber that I would define as racist or sexist or bigoted. We have very different ideas about how to get to particular end states where all Virginians can be happy, healthy, prosperous, and free. But just so I'm very clear, will I be nice this session? I would certainly like to be, but I'm not about to sit here and listen to that, Mr. Speaker, and then go home to my constituents and have them ask me, why didn't you stand up and defend us? So let's have a robust policy discussion. But if you're going to question the faith or the intentions of anybody that happens to disagree with you on policy, then you don't get to lecture us on compassion, tolerance, or an open debate. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Bravo, bravo.
Well, I think that summarised what you were saying just a few seconds ago.
Yeah.
This idea that being stood up to and realising that you can't impute motives to other people.
Yes, you can't. And I think there's target picking. I think they have soft targets who, you know, if somebody said to me, oh, you're racist, even in a live debate, I mean, I literally would laugh. It's just...
Well, just for extra context, I don't know a lot about Nick Freitas, apart from the fact I think that was a brilliant speech. He did 2 tours of Iraq. Right. And he was special forces. So pick on him.
Yeah, go ahead. He can
somehow I don't see it happening.
He could probably tolerate it. He'll probably be able to tolerate the pressure. There is a lot of cowardice, isn't there?
Yeah.
And a lot of beyond cowardice, just weak will. People just really wanting a quiet life. I'm heartbroken, to be perfectly honest with you, to see over the last 3 years the way big corporations and organizations have responded to the various pressures that are thrown at them. I see nothing but cowardice. I see nothing but folding to pressure for the basest reasons imaginable.
And also one of the things that's it is commented upon from time to time, but if you follow the history of feminism, it's not Schadenfreude, you know, I don't enjoy, but being at the university, I saw how it was increasingly feminized in certain ways. Partly that's brilliant. It was too masculine. there are aspects that needed to be improved. But as I mentioned with Erin Pizza, she was driven out of the country by radical feminists who used violent threats, which is quite ironic for someone who set up a shelter for women. But the idea that now, with transgender issues, feminists are on the receiving end of exactly the same techniques they used for quite a long time. So as a man at university trying to talk, and I'm like quite blokey, if you'd been at the university, I'd love to have seen that as a lecturer, because you are almost visually
an offence,
a threat and an offence.
Yeah,
and that is, but. And I just find that, these techniques, this closing down of debate, it is now being used against women in the worst possible way. Their very sex is being threatened.
Oh yeah, they're not.
But my point is, it's a bit childish, but they started it to a certain degree.
Let's go back a second, because we are moving into the very last portion here. So feminism, feminization of the workplace. You agree that women should have rights, obviously. Equal opportunity in everything. Education, work.
Well, except this is one of the red pill documentary insights that in all the and it was never answered by any of the feminist contributors. In all the top statistics for deaths in dangerous industries, oil drilling, deep sea, the women, there are no women, almost no women fatalities.
Would that mean that you?
Well, you're talking about equal opportunities.
Equal opportunities.
My point is, it's interesting that all the opportunity to die in a dangerous job isn't equally shared.
It isn't equally shared, but I would say let women apply if they want to. The only place I would say.
Well, but it's not. But this is the point. I'm sorry, I'm not being. It's rare for me. I'm being too subtle. What I'm suggesting is, it's not a case of women are being blocked from those professions.
Oh,
who on earth would want to do it in their right mind unless you needed the money?
No. I don't. I totally reject the idea that women are being blocked from these.
Yeah. So the question is, why is it 99% of men are the ones dying?
Yes.
Now that if you see, this is what I believe in imminent critique. If you believe in equal rights, let's push it to the nth degree.
Yes.
If you want to debate slavery, let's discuss the Arab slave trade. Let's have all these debates. Should be proper debates.
Yes.
Go into the true history.
Yes.
Rather than these partial self-selecting samples.
Yeah.
Men are patriarchal abusers of women, blah, blah, blah. That is often true.
Yes.
They're also dying in droves. And all these issues that you're just not allowed to mention. And when Erin Pizza did mention it, she was driven out the country because the Stalinists, the Maoists, don't like it.
I'm just trying to save your ass, really. I could just let you die in the comment section.
but I'm genuinely interested. What have I said that's offensive or wrong?
No. This is just the nonsense that you have to go through. You have to. It's like what did Zizek say? I don't want to live in a society where you have to say that sexual assault is wrong. It should be given that it's a wrong. And for years, I didn't know what he was saying. I was like, we don't live in such a society, but we do. You have to say you don't like drowning kittens every morning before you get to speak. I also don't like drowning kittens every morning. I'm not for slavery. I'm not for racism. I'm not for...
But something else that I really would be sorry if I've just made this up, but I'm pretty sure I remember him talking about, and I'm not sure he wrote it down, but I think I've seen him talking about, back in Eastern Europe, he was talking about traditional societies have many, many problems, men beating up wives when they come home drunk, all these things.
Yes.
But he said one example would be if a woman is raped, then you would often find the is hanging from a tree, castrated by the menfolk.
Yeah. You said the naughty word. Please timestamp that. You're going to have to...
sorry.
It's okay. So we'll just delete or beep it or delete it and leave me in saying that. It's because YouTube is very strict on this.
So what can I say? Assaulted?
Well, I say sexual assault, but I just had this discussion 2 days ago with a woman who was sexually assaulted. It's not sexual assault. Sexual assault could be...
I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to.
No, it's okay. But like sexual assault could be I've grabbed your bum.
Yeah.
Or I've gotten hold of you. Rape is penetration. Okay.
If I just say violence against women.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
I guess so. Yes.
So can I redo that? Just that, or leave it out because it's not that important.
No. Please, it's a good example.
Right. Zizek talks. I've seen him talk about in Eastern Europe. if there's violence committed, serious violence committed against a woman, occasionally the perpetrator, you might see them hanging from a tree castrated.
The point you're making is against the notion that men are generally for this and it's all about toxic masculinity and
well, not even that. You could argue that the man hanging from the tree who's been castrated, that's also a demonstration of toxic masculinity.
You could argue that,
but,
yes.
But I think that the idea I'm trying to get across is that, as with all things in life, nothing's that simple. So the toxic, inverted commas, masculinity that leads to someone being directly punished is also the thing in that society that would make extreme violence against women rare. Whereas in this society, it's more common because we don't have people being castrated hanging from trees.
Which is not something that you advocate for.
No.
Obviously. Just to add to your point, I found out, I think it was about a couple of years ago, that in prison, if I'd gone to prison and I got a cellmate who was guilty of violence, sexual assault against a woman, it could be put to me as a cellmate that it's my duty to batter him for that crime. So he's been sent to prison, and the other prisoners, if I refused to do that, they would batter me. Now, this is not good. I'm not saying it's good, but prisons are full of, if you want to talk toxic masculinity, these are psychopathic, narcissistic, criminal men, often extremely violent, and within their rule book, there is still the idea of, if necessary, violently protecting women. It's not it, and I think the reason why I'm saying is this because I hear the other side's point of view, and it would be as though all men are saying, "Oh, this is wonderful. This is a good thing. Well done, comrade, for the thing that." No, they have wives, they have daughters. They don't like it. It is not well liked.
But then I'm sure there'd be a feminist angle that would say the men who then respond with violence are still wrong and violent. But I'm trying to identify the chain of violence that I think, in a different video, Nick Frazier's makes this point. All violence is not bad. Violence to defend the innocent, violence to defend the vulnerable is a justifiable form of violence. But again, we live in a society where the notion of violence, because as far as I can see in Britain, for example, and in parts of America, the police are anti-violence in the sense they won't use force to stop anything. Which is, again, in my lifetime, is a very odd development, that the police are anti-violence. So therefore, there's a free-for-all.
We have 60 seconds left. What would you like to say in those 60 seconds that makes the world a better place?
Maybe don't talk to me so often.
If you want to make the world a better place, stop interviewing me. Where can people find you? Will you eventually cave and have a website or a place where you can write essays?
Well, I hope to keep working with you. And also, I think I'm working on probably a book on some of these issues. And I've done a bit. I did a piece for the Lotus Eaters podcast, a written piece.
Oh, did you?
So awesome. I'm gonna start doing more stuff because this is cathartic. I said at the very beginning when we first ever spoke, this is me getting cheap therapy from you.
Yes. No, I
wasn't lying.
Codependently, I'm delighted to help you, which keeps my therapist in beer money, which is wonderful. I look forward to the book. I hope I can encourage you eventually to maybe set up a blog or something where people just go over there and get their digital jollies fulfilled. Pornographically, of course. Dr. Paul Taylor, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate your time. Thank you, sir. We'll do this again.
Cheers.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and for your attention. And we look forward to speaking to you again very soon.